Blood splattered across the church's oak floor as Nora Whitfield clung to the altar, her eyes wide with terror. This wasn't the first time her husband had raised his hand against her, but tonight in the small town of Sloan, Nevada, she feared it would be the last. The year was 1879, and the desert night stretched cold and silent beyond the stained glass windows of the only church for miles. "Please, Henry, don't do this," she begged, her once white dress now stained with crimson from the gash on her forehead. Henry Whitfield, a man whose charm had faded after their vows 2 years prior, stood before her with fury in his eyes and a bloodied fist. The local saloon owner, once respected in Sloan, had carefully hidden his true nature from the townsfolk. "You embarrass me tonight," he snarled, advancing toward her as she scrambled backward. "Talking to that rancher like you were free to do as you please." The conversation had been innocent, merely a discussion about the weather with Mr. Thompson, who had tipped his hat to her on the boardwalk. But Henry's jealousy knew no reason, and his rage had built until they returned home, where he had struck her harder than ever before. When he had turned to grab his belt, Nora had fled into the night, her feet carrying her to the only place she thought might be sanctuary God's house. But Henry had followed, and now there was nowhere left to run. The church door suddenly swung open, a gust of cold desert air sweeping through the sanctuary. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the night sky. "Evening," a deep voice drawled. "Seems I'm interrupting something." Henry spun around. "Get out of here. This is between me and my wife." The stranger stepped into the lantern light, revealing himself to be a man with dust-covered clothes and a weathered face. His dark hat cast shadows over his eyes, but Nora could see the hard set of his jaw. A revolver hung at his hip, though his hand made no move toward it. "Can't do that," the stranger said, his voice calm but firm. "Not when a lady's bleeding in a house of God." "Quinn," Henry spat, recognizing the man. "Quinn Sutherland, this isn't your business." Quinn Sutherland removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with dust from the trail. His eyes were focused now on Nora, taking in her bloodied appearance. "Mrs. Whitfield," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Would you prefer to stay here with your husband, or might you need some assistance?" Henry lunged forward, but Quinn stepped aside with surprising agility for a man his size. "I wouldn't," Quinn warned. "Sheriff Dawson might be a friend of yours, but even he'd have trouble explaining away a body in the church." Nora found her voice. "Please," she whispered, "help me." That was all Quinn needed to hear. With a swift motion, he positioned himself between Nora and Henry. "Mrs. Whitfield will be coming with me now," he stated. "You'd be wise to sleep off whatever's got into you, Whitfield. She's my wife." Henry roared, his face contorted with rage. "And she's bleeding," Quinn replied evenly. "Come along, madam." Henry stepped forward again, but this time Quinn's hand did move to his gun, not drawing it but making his meaning clear. Henry, for all his cruelty, wasn't foolish enough to challenge an armed man who looked like he knew how to use his weapon. "This isn't over," Henry hissed as Quinn guided Nora toward the door. "It might be wiser if it was," Quinn replied. Outside, the night air was crisp, stars scattered across the vast Nevada sky. Quinn led Nora to a horse tethered nearby. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly. Nora nodded, though her entire body trembled. "Yes." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her. With a gentle kick to the horse's flanks, they rode away from the church, leaving Henry Whitfield standing in the doorway, his threats carried away by the desert wind. "Where are we going?" Nora asked, her voice barely audible over the horse's hooves. "Somewhere safe," Quinn replied. "Just for tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." As they rode through the darkness, Nora Whitfield felt something she hadn't experienced in years' hope. The steady presence of the cowboy behind her was unfamiliar but reassuring. For the first time since her wedding day, she felt protected rather than threatened. What she didn't know then was that this night would change both their lives forever. The cowboy who had appeared like a guardian angel would become much more, and the desperate flight from the church would be just the beginning of their journey. Quinn Sutherland guided his horse away from the main trail, taking a winding path through the scrubby terrain that surrounded Sloan. He knew these lands better than most, having worked them for nearly 5 years since arriving from Texas. At 32, he had seen enough of the world to know when someone needed help, and the woman trembling against him needed it desperately. "My ranch is about an hour's ride," he explained, his voice low. "It's not much, but Henry won't find you there tonight." Nora nodded but remained silent. The pain in her head was worsening, and she feared she might fall from the saddle if not for Quinn's steadying presence behind her. "You're hurt worse than you're letting on," Quinn observed after several minutes of silence. "I'll manage," Nora replied, her words slurring slightly. Quinn urged the horse to a small outcropping of rocks and gently brought them to a stop. "Let me take a look at that cut before we go further." He dismounted and helped her down, his strong hands careful as they guided her to sit on a flat boulder. From his saddlebag, he produced a canteen and a clean bandana. "This might sting," he warned as he poured water onto the cloth. Nora flinched as he cleaned the blood from her forehead. Under the moonlight, Quinn could see the gash was deep but not life-threatening. What concerned him more were the older bruises visible on her neck and wrists. "How long has he been hurting you?" Quinn asked, his voice gentle but direct. Nora looked away. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me," Quinn said simply. The sincerity in his voice caused her to meet his gaze. In the moonlight, she could see his eyes clearly, for the first time deep blue and filled with concern, not pity. "Almost since we married," she admitted. "At first it was just harsh words, then shoving." Then, she gestured to her injuries. Quinn's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Why didn't you leave and go where?" Nora asked bitterly. "My parents died 2 years ago. I have no family left. Henry owns the most profitable business in town. The sheriff considers him a friend." "Who would believe me? Who would help me?" Quinn finished bandaging her wound in silence, understanding the trap she had been in. When he spoke again, his voice was resolute. "I believe you," he said, "and I'm helping you now." For the first time that night, Nora felt tears spring to her eyes. Not from pain or fear, but from the simple kindness of his words. They remounted and continued toward Quinn's ranch. As they rode, Nora learned that Quinn had come to Nevada after the war, buying a modest spread and raising cattle. He wasn't wealthy, but he was respected by those who knew him. He lived alone, with occasional help from a young ranch hand named Illy who stayed in a bunkhouse on the property. "Illy's visiting his sister in Carson City," Quinn explained. "Won't be back for another week. You'll have privacy." When they finally arrived at the ranch, Nora was nearly unconscious from exhaustion and pain. Quinn's home was a simple but solid structure, a main house built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, a small barn, and a corral where several horses dozed in the moonlight. He carried her inside and placed her gently on his bed, lighting a lamp to better examine her injuries. "I'll sleep in the chair," he assured her, nodding toward a wooden rocking chair near the fireplace. "You need proper rest." Too weak to argue, Nora allowed him to help her remove her blood-stained outer dress, leaving her in her chemise and petticoats. Quinn discreetly turned away as she settled under the quilt, then moved to stoke the fire that had burned low in his absence. "Thank you," Nora whispered as sleep began to claim her. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come to the church." Quinn's face darkened. "I know exactly what would have happened," he said quietly, "and I couldn't let that be." As Nora drifted into an exhausted sleep, Quinn sat in the rocking chair, his revolver across his lap. He doubted Henry would find them tonight, but he wouldn't take chances with the woman's safety. Something about her stirred protective instincts he hadn't felt in years, not since losing his younger sister to typhoid back in Texas. But as he watched Nora's chest rise and fall in sleep, he recognized that what he felt wasn't merely protection. There was something more, a connection he couldn't explain, formed in the space of a few desperate hours. Morning would bring difficult decisions and dangerous consequences, but for now she was safe. And Quinn Sutherland was determined to keep her that way, no matter what it might cost him. The dawn broke over the Nevada hills, casting golden light through the single window of Quinn's cabin. Nora woke slowly, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night flooded back, and she touched her forehead, feeling the bandage Quinn had applied. Quinn himself was no longer in the rocking chair. The cabin was quiet, but she could smell coffee brewing and hear the subtle sounds of movement outside. Carefully, she sat up, wincing at the various pains that reminded her of Henry's rage. The door opened and Quinn entered carrying a bucket of fresh water. He stopped when he saw she was awake. "Morning," he said, setting the bucket down. "How's the head?" "Painful," Nora admitted, "but better than last night. Thank you again for your help." Quinn nodded, moving to the small stove where coffee percolated in a battered pot. "Hungry? I've got eggs and some bacon." The normality of the offer, as though she were a guest rather than a fugitive from her own husband, almost made Nora smile. "Yes, thank you." While Quinn prepared a simple breakfast, Nora took stock of her situation. Her dress was ruined, stained with blood and torn from her desperate flight. She had no possessions beyond what she wore, no money, and nowhere to go. The gravity of her circumstances settled heavily upon her shoulders. "I've been thinking," Quinn said as he placed a plate before her. "Henry will be looking for you. Sloane's not big enough for you to hide for long." Nora stared at the food, her appetite suddenly diminished. "I know. You have options," Quinn continued, sitting across from her with his own plate. "Not many, but they exist." "What options?" Nora asked, unable to see any path forward that didn't lead back to Henry or worse. "You could go to Carson City, maybe find work there. It's larger, easier to disappear in." Quinn took a sip of his coffee. "Or further west to California. New beginnings are easier to come by there." Nora picked at her eggs. "With what money, and how would I get there? Henry would catch me before I made it 10 miles. Quinn studied her for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "I could take you," he said finally. "I've been meaning to drive some cattle to market in Carson City anyway. It would give me a reason to be on the road with you." Nora looked up, surprised by the offer. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Quinn replied simply. "I know you deserve better than what was happening in that church." His directness both comforted and confused her. In her experience, men didn't help women without expecting something in return, especially not at risk to themselves. Henry would be furious, and while Quinn seemed capable, confronting an angry husband and the town sheriff who backed him was dangerous. "What about after Carson City?" she asked. "What then?" Quinn shrugged. "That would be your choice, but you'd be free to make it free." The word echoed in Nora's mind like a prayer. At 26, she had never truly been free from her parents' expectations, from society's constraints, from Henry's control. "I don't know how I could ever repay you," she said quietly. "Not asking for payment," Quinn responded, finishing his breakfast. "Just doing what needs doing." After breakfast, Quinn brought her a shirt and trousers that belonged to his young ranch hand, Illy. They were still too large for her slender frame, but cleaner and more practical than her ruined dress. "We should leave today," Quinn said as he gathered supplies. "Henry will check the obvious places, first the stagecoach stop, the train station. But it won't take him long to remember my intervention and come looking here." Nora changed behind a blanket Quinn had strung up for privacy, struggling with the unfamiliar men's clothing but grateful for the clean fabric against her skin. When she emerged, Quinn gave her an appraising look. "Might need a hat to hide your hair," he commented, "too recognizable otherwise." He found her a spare hat, which she tucked her long auburn hair into. The transformation was startling at a distance. She might pass for a young man or boy. "We'll take the back trails," Quinn explained as they prepared to leave. "Longer route, but safer. I've got about 30 head of cattle I was planning to drive up next month, but we can take them now. A cattle drive with a young ranch hand won't raise eyebrows." As they worked to prepare, loading provisions and gathering the small herd from the pasture, Nora was struck by Quinn's efficiency. He moved with the confident ease of a man accustomed to hard work and quick decisions. Despite her fear, she found herself drawing strength from his calm demeanor. By midday, they were ready. Quinn had packed 2 horses with supplies and readied a third for Nora to ride. The cattle, mostly young steers ready for market, were gathered in a loose group, awaiting the drive. "It's about 4 days to Carson City at a good pace with the cattle," Quinn told her as he checked the saddle on her horse. "We'll camp along the way. Once there, we'll sell the herd and you can decide your next step." Nora mounted her horse, adjusting to the feel of riding astride in trousers rather than side saddle in a dress. It was strange but liberating. "What about your ranch?" she asked suddenly. "Won't leaving it unattended be a problem?" Quinn shrugged. "Neighbors will keep an eye out." It's not uncommon for a rancher to be gone a week or two for a drive. As they prepared to leave, Quinn suddenly tensed, his gaze fixed on the distant trail leading to his property. A cloud of dust suggested riders approaching. "Henry?" Nora asked, her heart racing. "Likely," Quinn replied grimly. "And probably the sheriff with him. We need to move. Now." He mounted his horse quickly and gave a sharp whistle to start the cattle moving. They headed north, away from the approaching riders, taking a narrow trail that wound through the hills behind Quinn's property. As they rode, Nora glanced back once to see 3 riders cresting the hill by Quinn's cabin. Even at a distance, she recognized Henry's stocky figure and the sheriff's distinctive hat. The third man she didn't know. "They'll follow," she said, fear evident in her voice. "Let them try," Quinn replied, his focus on the trail ahead. "I know these hills better than they do." The cattle drive had begun, and with it, Nora's journey to freedom. But freedom, she was quickly learning, came with its own perils. Henry wouldn't let her go easily, and now she had drawn Quinn Sutherland into her desperate flight. As the sun climbed higher in the Nevada sky, Nora couldn't help but wonder if she had traded one dangerous situation for another, potentially more lethal one. But when she looked at Quinn, steadily guiding the herd forward with quiet competence, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: trust. Whether that trust was misplaced remained to be seen. The first day on the trail passed in tense silence. Quinn kept them moving at a steady pace, following streams and gulches where the cattle could be driven without leaving obvious tracks. His knowledge of the land impressed Nora, who had never ventured far beyond the confines of Sloan since her marriage. By late afternoon, the distant sound of hoofbeats had faded entirely, but Quinn remained vigilant. "They'll have split up," he explained as they paused to water the cattle at a narrow creek. "Henry knows enough about tracking to be dangerous." Nora dismounted stiffly, her body unused to so many hours in the saddle. Despite her discomfort, she helped Quinn guide the cattle to drink, learning quickly how to move among the animals without startling them. "You're a natural," Quinn observed as she gently urged a hesitant steer toward the water. Nora smiled, surprised by the compliment. "My father raised horses before he died. I used to help with the foals." "What happened to his ranch?" Quinn asked. Nora's smile faded. "Henry happened. After we married, he sold the land to pay debts from the saloon. Said raising horses was no business for his wife anyway." Quinn's expression darkened, but he said nothing, focusing instead on refilling their canteens. As dusk approached, they found a sheltered hollow to make camp. The cattle settled easily, tired from the day's journey. Quinn built a small, smokeless fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. "Sorry it's not fancier," he apologized, handing Nora a tin plate. "After today, I'd eat tree bark gratefully," she replied with unexpected humor. Quinn's laugh surprised them, both a warm, rich sound that seemed to lighten the air around them. Nora realized it was the first time she'd heard him laugh, and found herself wanting to hear it again. They ate in companionable silence, the western sky painted in spectacular reds and golds as the sun set behind distant mountains. Despite the circumstances, there was a strange peace to the moment that Nora hadn't experienced in years. "Henry doesn't know about the cattle drive," Quinn said after they had finished eating. "That gives us an advantage. He'll be looking for a man and woman fleeing, not a rancher moving stock to market with a young hand." "Will that be enough?" Nora asked. Quinn considered this. "For a while. Once we reach Carson City, you'll have more options." "What kind of options?" Nora pressed. Quinn poked at the fire with a stick. "You could take the train further west, San Francisco maybe. Cities make it easier to start fresh, or north to Portland. Lumber towns are growing fast there, need workers of all kinds." The vastness of these possibilities overwhelmed Nora. She had never imagined life beyond Nevada, had never dared to dream of such freedom. "What would I do in a city?" she wondered aloud. "I know nothing of city life." "You'd learn," Quinn said simply. You're intelligent and adaptable, those serve well anywhere. His confidence in her abilities stirred something in Nora's chest, a flutter of hope that perhaps she was more than what Henry had reduced her to. As night fell completely, Quinn arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. I'll take first watch, he said. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. Nora settled into her bedroll, watching Quinn through the dancing flames as he sat with his back against a boulder, rifle across his knees. In the firelight, she could study his features more clearly than before, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crease between his brows that spoke of habitual concentration, the way his eyes reflected the flames as he scanned the darkness around them. Quinn, she said softly. He turned to look at her. Yes, thank you, not just for helping me escape, but for making me feel. She searched for the right word, capable again. A hint of a smile touched his lips. You always were capable, Mrs. Whitfield, you just needed the chance to remember it. The use of her married name jolted her unpleasantly. Please, she said, call me Nora. Quinn nodded. Nora then, sleep now, you're safe. As exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, Nora realized that for the first time in years she actually felt safe. The irony wasn't lost on her that she should feel this way while fleeing across open country, pursued by an angry husband, in the company of a man she barely knew. Yet there was something about Quinn Sutherland that inspired trust. Perhaps it was the quiet competence with which he moved through the world, or the respect he showed her without question. Whatever it was, Nora found herself grateful for it as sleep claimed her beneath the vast Nevada sky. Quinn watched her long after she fell asleep, his thoughts troubled. He hadn't told Nora the full truth that Henry Whitfield was known for his vindictiveness, that the sheriff owed Henry money and favors, that helping her had likely made Quinn an enemy of two of the most powerful men in the county. But watching her sleep peacefully, perhaps for the first time in years, Quinn couldn't bring himself to regret his actions. There was something about Nora Whitfield that called to him a strength beneath her fear, a light that Henry had tried but failed to extinguish. Quinn shifted his gaze to the surrounding darkness, fingers resting lightly on his rifle. Whatever came, he would protect her. The rest would sort itself out along the trail. The night passed without incident, and dawn found them already moving, Quinn having roused Nora before first light. The second day proved harder than the first, the terrain growing more rugged as they pushed northward through the hills. By midday, dark clouds had gathered, unusual for the season but not unheard of. Quinn eyed them warily as they drove the cattle across a high ridge. Might get wet tonight, he commented, pulling his coat tighter. Nora, who had been quietly bearing the increasing soreness from riding, nodded. Will the cattle be all right? They're tougher than they look, Quinn assured her. It's the trail I'm worried about. Rain turns these paths to mud quick. As if summoned by his concern, the first drops began to fall. Within minutes, a steady rain was soaking them both. Quinn urged them forward, seeking shelter in a stand of pines ahead. They managed to gather the cattle beneath the trees just as the rain intensified, becoming a downpour that turned the world gray. Thunder rolled across the sky, startling the steers. Quinn and Nora worked together to keep them calm, moving among the nervous animals with quiet words and gentle touches. We'll wait it out here, Quinn decided, rain streaming from the brim of his hat. No sense pushing through this. They took shelter beneath a particularly dense pine, its branches providing some protection from the worst of the deluge. Quinn removed his coat and draped it over Nora's shoulders despite her protests. You're soaked through, he insisted, and these shirts of Ellie's don't provide much warmth. Indeed, Nora was shivering, her borrowed clothes clinging to her slender frame. She accepted the coat gratefully, wrapping it around herself. It smelled of leather, tobacco, and something uniquely quintessent she found oddly comforting. What made you come to the church that night? She asked suddenly, the question having lingered in her mind since their flight. Quinn was silent for a moment, rain dripping from his hat as he considered his answer. I was riding back from the Thompson place when I saw you running, followed at a distance. When I realized where you were headed and saw Henry following, I knew something was wrong. But why help me? Nora pressed. "You could have just ridden on, most would have." Quinn's blue eyes met hers directly. "I've seen what happens when good people look away from suffering. After the war, I promised myself I wouldn't be that kind of man." "You fought in the war?" Nora asked, realizing how little she knew about him. Quinn nodded. "Confederate cavalry, not by choice. Texas didn't give young men many options, saw enough bloodshed to last several lifetimes." He looked away, his expression distant. "When it ended, I headed west, wanted open spaces and clean air, somewhere to start fresh." "Like what I'm trying to do now," Nora observed softly. "Similar enough," Quinn agreed, his gaze returning to her face, "though you've got better reasons." The rain continued unabated, forcing them to spend the remainder of the day huddled beneath the pines. Quinn managed to rig a small shelter using a tarp from his supplies, giving them a dry space to sit. The cattle settled, accustomed enough to weather to wait it out patiently. As evening approached, the rain finally began to ease. Quinn ventured out to check the trail ahead while Nora tended to the horses, speaking softly to them as she adjusted their blankets. When Quinn returned, his expression was grim. Trails washed out in several places. "We'll have to find another route." "Is that bad?" Nora asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "It means we'll have to drop down to lower ground, closer to the main trail, more chance of being seen." Quinn ran a hand through his damp hair. "But we don't have much choice. Can't risk the cattle on those slopes now." They made camp where they were, the ground beneath the pines relatively dry. With the rain now reduced to a gentle patter, Quinn was able to start a small fire, its warmth welcome after hours in damp clothes. Nora helped prepare their simple meal, working alongside Quinn with increasing confidence. As they ate, she noticed him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" she asked, self-conscious suddenly. "Just thinking how different you seem from the woman I found in the church," Quinn replied. "There's a strength in you coming through." Nora considered this. "Maybe it was always there, just buried. Henry had a way of making me feel helpless, useless." She poked at the fire with a stick. "The more helpless I felt, the more control he had." Quinn nodded. "Men like him feed on fear." "Were you ever afraid during the war?" Nora asked. "Every day," Quinn admitted without hesitation. "Any man who says otherwise is either a liar or a fool." He looked up at the clearing sky where stars were beginning to appear between the clouds. "Fear keeps you alive if you use it right. It's when it paralyzes you that it becomes dangerous." They fell into companionable silence, the crackling fire and distant thunder the only sounds. Nora felt a curious sense of peace despite their precarious situation, as though she had stepped outside the suffocating confines of her life with Henry into a world that, while dangerous, at least allowed her to breathe. When it came time to sleep, Quinn again took first watch, but Nora found rest elusive. Every sound in the darkness seemed to be Henry approaching, every rustle of wind became footsteps. Finally, she sat up, pulling Quinn's coat tighter around her shoulders. "Can't sleep?" Quinn asked from his position at the edge of their camp. "Every noise," Nora began, then stopped, embarrassed by her fear. Quinn moved closer, sitting beside her. "It's natural, your body's still on alert." "Does it get easier?" she asked. Living with fear, Quinn considered this. "It changes. Becomes less immediate, more manageable." He added a small branch to the fire. "After a while, you learn which fears to listen to and which to set aside." His calm pragmatism was reassuring. Nora found herself studying his profile in the firelight, struck by how at ease he seemed in this wild setting, as though the open country suited him in a fundamental way that walls and roofs never could. "Tell me about your home," she said suddenly. "Before Texas, before the war." Quinn looked surprised by the request but obliged. "Kentucky originally, small farm in bluegrass country. My father raised horses, thoroughbreds mostly." A smile touched his lips. "My mother grew the finest roses in 3 counties, stubbornly carving out beauty amid all that practicality." "What happened to them?" Nora asked, drawn into this glimpse of his past. "Father died before the war, kicked by a stallion he was breaking. Mother held on until 63, then fever took her." His voice remained steady, though Nora sensed the old grief beneath his words. My sister Rebecca came with me to Texas afterward. She was all the family I had left. The use of past tense told Nora the rest of the story without Quinn having to say it. I'm sorry, she said softly. Quinn nodded acknowledgement. Life takes its toll on all of us, one way or another. The simple truth of this statement hung between them. After a moment, Quinn changed the subject. What about you? Before Henry, Nora wrapped her arms around her knees. Nothing so interesting. Grew up on my father's horse ranch outside Sloan. Mother taught me letters and figures, hoped I'd become a teacher someday. Why didn't you? Quinn asked. Nora sighed. Father's health began failing when I was 19. The ranch needed attention and teaching positions were scarce. Then Henry came along charming, seemingly successful. He courted me properly, impressed my parents. When he proposed, it seemed like providence. And after the wedding, Quinn prompted gently. Everything changed so gradually I hardly noticed at first. A sharp word here, a criticism there. He sold my horse first, said a saloon owner's wife had no business riding about like some ranch hand. Then came the restrictions on where I could go, who I could speak to. Nora's voice hardened. By the time he first struck me, I was already isolated, already believing I somehow deserved his anger. Quinn's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of understanding that required no words. The simple touch conveyed more comfort than any platitudes could have. You should try to sleep, he said after a moment. Tomorrow will be difficult terrain. Nora nodded, returning to her bedroll. This time, sleep came more easily. Quinn's steady presence a bulwark against the fears that had kept her awake. Morning brought clearer skies and the challenge of finding an alternate route. Quinn scouted ahead while Nora prepared a quick breakfast, her movements growing more confident with each task she undertook. When Quinn returned, his expression was thoughtful. We'll need to head northeast for a few miles, then cut back toward Carson City. It's longer but safer for the cattle. They set out as the sun climbed higher, the landscape transformed by the rain. Wildflowers had appeared overnight, splashing the usually drab terrain with unexpected color. The cattle moved more eagerly, drawn by the fresh growth. As they rode, Nora found herself watching Quinn, the ease with which he guided his horse, the quiet authority in his gestures when directing the herd. There was a certainty to his movements that she found compelling, so different from Henry's bullish swagger or frenetic energy. By midday, they had reached a broad valley where a small river, swollen with rainwater, cut across their path. Quinn assessed the crossing carefully. We'll need to find a shallower point, he decided. This current's too strong for the cattle. They followed the riverbank for nearly a mile before finding a suitable ford. Even there, the crossing would be challenging. Quinn explained the process to Nora, who listened attentively. I'll take the lead steer across first, he said. The others will likely follow. You stay on this bank until they're all in the water, then cross behind them. Keep them moving forward if any try to turn back. Nora nodded, though anxiety flickered across her face. Quinn noticed and added, You can handle this. I've seen how you are with the animals. His confidence bolstered her resolve. She watched as Quinn urged his horse into the water, leading the first steer. The animal hesitated initially, then followed, encouraged by Quinn's calm commands. One by one, the other cattle entered the river, forming a line behind their leader. Nora did as instructed, keeping the stragglers moving with gentle persistence. When the last steer was in the water, she urged her own horse forward, feeling the current pull at its legs as they entered the flow. Midway across, one of the younger steers panicked, turning against the current and threatening to disrupt the entire crossing. Without hesitation, Nora guided her horse alongside it, her voice firm but soothing as she redirected the frightened animal. From the opposite bank, Quinn watched with admiration as Nora handled the situation with natural skill. When she finally reached his side, her clothes were soaked to the knees, but her eyes were bright with accomplishment. Well done, Quinn said simply. Nora smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face, erasing the shadows of fear that had lingered there. For a moment, Quinn forgot to breathe, struck by the sudden radiance of her. They continued through the afternoon, making good progress despite the detour. As dusk approached, Quinn led them to a sheltered clearing near a stand of aspen trees, an ideal spot to camp for the night. While Quinn secured the cattle, Nora gathered firewood and set about preparing their evening meal. They worked in comfortable tandem, their routine already established after just 2 days on the trail. As they ate, Quinn mentioned casually, "We should reach Carson City by tomorrow evening if we keep this pace." Nora's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "So soon?" Quinn nodded. "The detour cost us some time, but we've made it up today." Nora set her plate down, suddenly no longer hungry. The prospect of reaching Carson City, of deciding what came next, was both liberating and terrifying. "What will you do?" she asked, "after you sell the cattle?" Quinn considered the question. "Return to my ranch, I suppose, though it might be wise to lie low for a while, see if Henry's anger cools." "It won't," Nora said with certainty. "Not toward you. He'll see your help as a personal insult, a challenge to his authority." Quinn shrugged. "Then I'll face that when it comes." He studied her across the fire. "What about you? Have you decided?" Nora stared into the flames. "I've been thinking about San Francisco. It seems far enough away to be safe." Quinn nodded, though something in his expression tightened. "It's a good choice. Growing city opportunities for a woman of your intelligence." "But," Nora prompted, sensing his reservation. "But nothing," Quinn replied. "It's your decision to make." They fell silent, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Nora found herself reluctant to reach Carson City, to end this strange journey that had awakened something in her she'd thought long dead, a sense of possibility, of her own strength. More than that, she was reluctant to leave Quinn's company. In just 3 days, he had shown her more respect and kindness than Henry had in 2 years of marriage. There was an ease between them that felt both natural and precious. As if reading her thoughts, Quinn said quietly, "Whatever you decide in Carson City, know that you've already proven you can survive on your own terms. That's no small thing." Nora met his gaze across the fire. "I couldn't have done it without your help." "You would have found a way," Quinn replied with certainty. "Maybe different, maybe harder, but you would have found it." His faith in her was a balm to wounds Henry had inflicted over years of systematic belittlement. Nora felt a surge of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Quinn noticed and misinterpreted. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't," Nora assured him, wiping her eyes. "It's just, no one has believed in me like that in a very long time." Quinn's expression softened. "Then they weren't really seeing you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. After a moment, Quinn stood, breaking the tension. "We should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As they prepared for sleep, Nora found herself watching Quinn covertly, noticing the careful way he moved, the consideration he showed even in small gestures. He was nothing like the men she had known before, neither her father's bluff heartiness nor Henry's calculated charm. There was an authenticity to Quinn Sutherland that drew her like a compass to north. That night, as she lay in her bedroll looking up at stars scattered across the vast Nevada sky, Nora realized with startling clarity that she didn't want to go to San Francisco. She didn't want this journey to end. But what that meant, what alternatives existed, she couldn't yet say. Freedom was still too new, the future too uncertain. For now, she would hold this realization close, another secret carried beneath the vast, indifferent sky. The 4th day dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day in the high desert. They broke camp early, both aware that this would likely be their last day on the trail together. The knowledge lent a bittersweetness to their usual morning routine. As they rode, the landscape gradually changed, becoming more populated. They passed occasional homesteads and small farms, signs that Carson City was drawing near. Quinn grew more vigilant, scanning each property they passed for potential threats. "Do you think Henry could have reached Carson City ahead of us?" Nora asked, voicing the fear that had been growing as they approached civilization. Quinn considered this. "It's possible if he took the main road and rode hard, but Carson City's much larger than Sloan. Even if he's there, finding you won't be easy." His words were meant to reassure, but Nora sensed his own concern beneath them. They rode in silence for several miles, each lost in thought. Around midday, they crested a hill that offered their first distant view of Carson City. Even from afar, Nora could see it was considerably larger than Sloan, with multiple streets lined with buildings and the glint of a river running alongside it. "We'll approach from the east," Quinn explained. "The cattle market is on that side of town. Less chance of being seen by anyone who might know you." Nora nodded, pulling her hat lower over her face. In her men's clothes, with her hair tucked away, she hoped she might pass unnoticed even if Henry was in the city. They descended toward Carson City slowly, the cattle moving at their usual unhurried pace. As they drew nearer, the sounds of the town became audible wagons creaking, distant voices, the occasional blast of a train whistle. For Nora, who had lived in the relative quiet of Sloan for years, the cacophony was both exciting and overwhelming. She found herself drawing closer to Quinn, taking comfort in his solid presence amid the growing stimuli. By late afternoon, they had reached the outskirts of Carson City. Quinn guided them expertly toward the stockyards, avoiding the main streets. The cattle market was still active, buyers and sellers concluding the day's business. Quinn approached a burly man who appeared to be in charge, negotiating briefly for the sale of his herd. Nora watched from a distance, maintaining her disguise as a ranch hand. The transaction was completed efficiently, with Quinn receiving a substantial amount of cash that he carefully stowed in his saddlebags. When he returned to Nora, his expression was satisfied. "Got a good price," he said. "Better than I expected." "What happens now?" Nora asked, suddenly uncertain in this unfamiliar environment. Quinn glanced at the setting sun. "Too late to start back tonight. We'll need lodging." He hesitated, then added, "It might be safer if we continue your disguise. A room for myself and my young ranch hand will raise fewer questions than a man traveling with a woman who isn't his wife." Nora agreed, though the practical arrangement highlighted the precariousness of her situation. Without the cattle drive as purpose and cover, her status was ambiguous, her future unclear. They found a modest hotel near the stockyards, where Quinn secured a room with 2 beds. The clerk barely glanced at Nora in her ranch hand disguise, assuming her to be the young man Quinn claimed. Their room was simple but clean, a vast improvement over sleeping on the ground. Nora stood awkwardly by the door as Quinn deposited their few belongings. "I should leave you to rest," Quinn said, sensing her discomfort. "I need to arrange for supplies for the return journey anyway." "When will you go back?" Nora asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Day after tomorrow, most likely," Quinn replied. "Gives the horses a chance to rest and me time to conduct some business." He hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a portion of the money he'd received for the cattle. "This is for you," he said, holding it out to her. "Should be enough to get you to San Francisco and set up there for a while." Nora stared at the offered money, emotion welling in her throat. "I can't take your money," she protested. "You earned it," Quinn insisted. "Couldn't have managed the drive without your help." When she still hesitated, he added more gently, "Please, Nora, let me do this much for you." The use of her name, spoken with such sincerity, broke her resistance. She accepted the money with trembling hands, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "No need," Quinn replied simply. "Just make good use of your freedom." He left soon after, promising to return with food. Alone in the hotel room, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation finally settling fully upon her. She was free, truly free, for the first time in years. The money Quinn had given her represented choices, possibilities she had thought forever lost. Yet instead of elation, she felt a profound sadness. The prospect of continuing without Quinn's steady presence was unexpectedly painful. In just 4 days, he had become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. When Quinn returned with a hot meal from a nearby restaurant, he found Nora standing by the window, gazing out at the busy street below. "Everything all right?" he asked, setting down the food. Nora turned to him, her expression troubled. "I've been thinking about San Francisco." Quinn nodded, arranging their dinner on the small table. "Natural to have second thoughts. It's a big decision." It's not that, Nora said slowly. I'm not sure I want to go at all. Quinn looked up, surprised. Where then? Portland, further east. Nora gathered her courage. What if I didn't leave Nevada? Quinn's hands stilled. That would be risky. Henry has connections throughout the territory. I know, Nora acknowledged, but so do you. You have your ranch, your life here. She took a deep breath. What if I stayed, not in Sloan, but nearby? The implications of her suggestion hung in the air between them. Quinn's expression was unreadable as he processed her words. Nora, he began carefully, you don't owe me anything for helping you. There's no obligation here. That's not what I meant, Nora said quickly. This isn't about obligation or gratitude, though I do feel both. She moved closer to him, her eyes earnest. These past days with you. I've felt more alive, more myself than I have in years, maybe ever. Quinn's gaze softened. The trail can have that effect. Freedom after confinement is intoxicating. It's not just that, Nora insisted. It's you, your kindness, your respect, the way you see me as capable rather than fragile. She hesitated, then added more quietly, the way you look at me sometimes when you think I don't notice. A flush crept up Quinn's neck. I never meant to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, Nora assured him. Just the opposite. Quinn ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. Nora, you've just escaped one man who controlled your life. The last thing you need is to become entangled with another. Is that what you think this would be? Entanglement? Nora asked, hurt evident in her voice. No, Quinn said quickly. But you deserve the chance to discover who you are on your own terms, not defined by any man including me. His words, though painful, revealed the depth of his respect for her. It was precisely this quality that had drawn her to him, his ability to see her as an equal, deserving of autonomy and self-determination. What if that's what I want? She asked softly. The chance to know myself better, but not alone. Quinn's blue eyes searched hers. Are you certain? There would be risks Henry won't give up easily, and my ranch is isolated, the work hard. I grew up on a ranch, Nora reminded him. Hard work doesn't frighten me, neither does isolation, not the kind that comes with freedom. She stepped closer still. As for Henry, I can't let fear of him dictate the rest of my life. Quinn reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gentle touch sent a shiver through Nora that had nothing to do with fear. If you came back with me, Quinn said, his voice low, it would have to be as your own choice, one you could unmake at any time. I wouldn't have you feel trapped again ever. I know, Nora whispered. That's why I'm asking. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, with deliberate care, Quinn leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning rather than demanding, and Nora responded with a surge of emotion that surprised them both. Her hands moved to his shoulders, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. I've wanted to do that since the river crossing, he admitted. Nora smiled. Why did you wait so long? Wasn't sure you'd welcome it, Quinn replied honestly, and the timing seemed complicated. Nora laughed softly, the sound warming Quinn more than any fire could have. Everything about our situation is complicated, she observed. I don't think timing would have made much difference. Quinn's smile faded, replaced by seriousness. If you come back with me, we'll need to be careful. Henry won't give up easily, especially not now. I know, Nora acknowledged, but we'll face that together. The word together hung between them, weighted with promise. They ate their dinner, discussing practical matters, how to disguise their return journey, what precautions to take at the ranch, how to establish Nora's new identity away from Sloan. But beneath the practicalities ran a current of joy neither could quite contain. That night, though propriety dictated they sleep in separate beds, their hands reached across the space between, fingers intertwined as if neither wanted to break contact even in sleep. Morning brought new resolution. Quinn went out early to purchase supplies while Nora remained in the room, still maintaining her disguise. When he returned, his expression was grim. Henry's in town, he said without preamble. Saw him at the sheriff's office as I was passing. Nora's heart raced. Did he see you? Quinn shook his head. Don't think so, but we need to leave now while he's occupied. They gathered their few belongings quickly. Quinn had purchased fresh supplies and 2 horses to replace those he had sold with the cattle. We'll take the northern route out of town, he explained as they prepared to depart. Less traveled, and it eventually connects with trails that will lead us back to my ranch from a different direction than Sloan. They left the hotel cautiously, Nora still disguised as a ranch hand. The streets of Carson City were busy with morning traffic, providing cover as they made their way toward the northern edge of town. They had nearly reached the outskirts when a shout cut through the general noise of the street. Nora froze, recognizing Henry's voice even before turning to see him pushing through the crowd toward them, the local sheriff at his side. "There," Henry bellowed, pointing directly at them. "That's Sutherland and my wife," Quinn reacted instantly, grabbing Nora's reins. "Ride," he commanded. "Don't stop for anything." They spurred their horses forward, weaving through startled pedestrians and wagons. Behind them, Henry and the sheriff scrambled for their own mounts, shouting for others to stop the fleeing pair. Quinn led them through a series of narrow alleys, his knowledge of the city proving invaluable as they evaded immediate pursuit. They emerged on the northern road, urging their horses to greater speed as they left the buildings of Carson City behind. "How did he know?" Nora gasped as they rode. "How did he recognize me?" "Might have been me he recognized first," Quinn replied grimly. "Or someone at the hotel talked, doesn't matter now." They rode hard for several miles before Quinn finally signaled to slow their pace. The horses were lathered and breathing heavily, unable to sustain such speed for long. "We need to pace them," Quinn explained, scanning the road behind them. "No sign of pursuit yet, but they'll be coming." The northern road eventually gave way to rougher terrain, allowing Quinn to lead them onto smaller trails that wound through the hills. By midday, they had left obvious paths entirely, following game trails and dry creek beds that would be difficult to track. "Where are we going?" Nora asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. "There's an old line cabin about 15 miles north of here," Quinn explained. "Used it sometimes when working this section of range. Few people know about it." They continued through the afternoon, the landscape growing increasingly rugged. Nora was exhausted, the strain of their flight and the emotional turmoil of the past days taking its toll. But she pressed on without complaint, drawing strength from Quinn's steady presence beside her. As dusk approached, they reached the cabin Quinn had described, a simple, one-room structure built of logs and nearly hidden among a stand of pines. It showed signs of disuse, but remained sound. Quinn helped Nora dismount, then tended to the horses while she explored the cabin's interior. It was sparsely furnished: a small stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed with a straw mattress. Dust covered everything, but it was dry and secure. By the time Quinn joined her inside, Nora had cleared the worst of the dust and was attempting to light the stove with supplies from their packs. "It's not much," Quinn apologized, setting down their belongings. "It's perfect," Nora replied sincerely. "No one will find us here." Quinn's expression remained troubled. "They'll try. Henry struck me as a man who doesn't give up easily, especially when his pride is wounded." Nora shuddered, remembering all too well the lengths to which Henry would go when he felt challenged or disrespected. "What will we do?" Quinn moved to help her with the stove, his hands sure as he arranged kindling. "We'll rest here tonight, then continue toward my ranch tomorrow by a roundabout route. Once there, we'll need to be vigilant for a while." The stove finally caught, its small flame gradually warming the cabin as darkness fell outside. Quinn prepared a simple meal from their supplies while Nora arranged their bedrolls, just one, this time spread before the stove's warmth. They ate in comfortable silence, the events of the day settling around them like the gathering night. When they had finished, Quinn took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across her knuckles. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "It's not too late to change your mind to go to San Francisco or anywhere else." Nora met his gaze steadily. "I've never been more certain of anything," she replied. "Whatever comes, I want to face it with you." Quinn's eyes darkened with emotion. He leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that expressed everything words could not desire, yes, but also respect, admiration, and a tenderness that made Nora's heart ache with unexpected joy. When they finally drew apart, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "Certainly not in a church in Sloane." Nora smiled, her hand coming up to touch his face. "I never expected to be found," she replied, "or to want to be." That night, in the shelter of the line cabin with the wind singing through the pines outside, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Quinn's touch was reverent, healing wounds Henry had inflicted not just on Nora's body, but on her sense of self-worth. In his arms, she felt not possession but partnership, not subjugation but elevation. For Quinn, the experience was equally transformative. The solitude he had maintained since the war, the careful distance he had kept from emotional entanglement, dissolved in the face of Nora's trust and vulnerability. In giving her safe harbor, he had found his own. Morning found them still entwined, reluctant to separate even as practical concerns reasserted themselves. They needed to continue their journey, to reach Quinn's ranch where, while not entirely safe, they would at least be on familiar ground. They departed the line cabin after a quick breakfast, Quinn carefully obscuring signs of their presence. The day was clear, the autumn sun warming the crisp air as they rode south and west through increasingly familiar territory. By late afternoon, they had reached land that Quinn recognized as bordering his own property. He grew more alert, scanning the landscape for any sign of intruders or pursuit. "We're close now," he told Nora. "Another hour should bring us home. Home." The word resonated within Nora, filling her with both anticipation and anxiety. Quinn's ranch represented safety, yes, but also a new beginning, a life she would shape alongside him rather than under Henry's control. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they crested a rise that offered a view of Quinn's ranch below. The main house, barn, and corral were visible in the golden light of late afternoon, a scene of peaceful isolation that made Nora's breath catch with its simple beauty. "It's not much," Quinn said, echoing his words from the line cabin, "but it's mine, and now if you want it, yours too." Nora reached for his hand, squeezing it in silent answer. Together, they descended toward the ranch, the horses picking up their pace as if sensing the proximity of home and rest. They were halfway down the slope when Quinn suddenly reined in, his posture alert. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low. Nora followed his gaze, noticing what had caught his attention, a thin column of smoke rising from behind the main house where no chimney stood. "Is it a fire?" she asked, alarm rising. Quinn shook his head. "Campfire, most likely. Someone's there who shouldn't be." They approached more cautiously now, using the terrain for cover. When they were within 100 yards of the main house, Quinn dismounted, instructing Nora to stay with the horses while he investigated. "If anything happens," he said seriously, "if you hear shots or I don't return in 20 minutes, ride north to the Thompson place. They'll help you." Nora nodded, though the thought of Quinn facing danger alone filled her with dread. She watched as he moved stealthily toward the house, his rifle in hand. The minutes stretched interminably as she waited, scanning the buildings for any sign of movement. Just as she was considering following him, Quinn reappeared, his expression grim as he hurried back to her. "Henry?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Quinn nodded. "Him and 2 others, the sheriff from Carson City and a man I don't recognize. They've made themselves comfortable waiting for us." Nora's heart raced. "What do we do?" Quinn considered their options. "We could turn back, try to reach the Thompsons' place before dark, but that just delays the inevitable. They know I'll return eventually." "And this is your home," Nora added, understanding his reluctance to abandon it. Quinn's eyes met hers. "Our home now," he corrected. "If you still want it to be." Despite the danger, Nora felt a surge of determination. "I do, and I'm tired of running from Henry, tired of letting him control my life even from a distance." Quinn studied her face, seeing the resolve there. "It'll be dangerous," he warned. 3 against 1 aren't odds I'd typically choose." 3 against 2, Nora corrected. I may not know how to use a gun, but I'm not helpless. A smile touched Quinn's lips. No, you certainly aren't, he thought for a moment. There might be a way to even the odds. But it would mean splitting up briefly. He outlined his plan, simple but potentially effective. Nora would circle around to the rear of the property while Quinn approached from the front, creating a diversion. While Henry and his companions were focused on Quinn, Nora would enter the house through the back door and retrieve the shotgun Quinn kept mounted above the fireplace. You ever fired a shotgun? Quinn asked. Nora shook her head. But I've seen it done. Point and pull the trigger. Essentially, Quinn confirmed, though the kick can be substantial, but just the sight of you armed might be enough to change the dynamics. As the sun dipped lower, they put their plan into action. Quinn gave Nora precise directions to the back of the property, then waited until she had disappeared among the scrub before mounting his horse and preparing for his own approach. Nora moved as quietly as possible, her heart pounding as she circled wide around the ranch buildings. When she reached the position Quinn had described, she could see the campfire more clearly and the three men seated around it in front of the house. Henry was instantly recognizable, his stocky build and balding head distinctive even at a distance. The sheriff from Carson City sat beside him, his badge glinting in the firelight. The third man was a stranger to Nora, lean and weathered with the look of a hired gun. She waited, watching as Quinn approached openly from the front, drawing their attention exactly as planned. When all three men stood to confront him, Nora slipped toward the house, staying low and using the gathering dusk for cover. She reached the back door without incident, finding it unlocked as Quinn had predicted. Inside, the house was dark and still, smelling of wood smoke and the coffee the intruders had prepared. Nora moved silently through the kitchen to the main room, where she could hear the confrontation unfolding outside. "Sutherland," Henry's voice carried clearly, "about time you showed up." "Where's my wife?" "Not here," Quinn replied calmly, "and not your concern anymore." "The law says different," the sheriff interjected. "A wife belongs with her husband." "The law also has opinions about beating women until they bleed," Quinn countered. Or did Henry neglect to mention that part? There was a momentary silence, then Henry's voice again, harder now. "Nora is coming home with me. Today, you can make this easy or difficult, Sutherland, but the outcome will be the same." Nora located the shotgun mounted above the fireplace just where Quinn had described. It was heavier than she expected, but she managed to lift it down, checking that it was loaded as Quinn had instructed. Outside, the conversation was growing more heated. "3 guns against 1, Sutherland," the third man observed. "Those aren't odds I'd want to face." "Then it's fortunate you're not facing them," Quinn replied, his voice steady. "Last chance to leave my property peacefully, gentlemen." Nora moved to the front door, positioning herself to see through the gap where it stood slightly ajar. Quinn stood facing the 3 men, his posture relaxed but alert. None had drawn weapons yet, but hands hovered near holsters. Taking a deep breath, Nora pushed the door open and stepped onto the porch, the shotgun held firmly in her hands. "It's actually 3 guns against 2, she announced, her voice stronger than she felt. Henry whirled, his face contorting with rage and disbelief as he saw her. "Nora, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Choosing my own path," she replied, moving to stand beside Quinn. "Something you never allowed." The sheriff looked uncomfortable now, glancing between Henry and Nora. "Mrs. Whitfield, your husband has been worried sick about you, says this man kidnapped you from the church in Sloan." Nora's laugh held no humor. "Is that what he told you?" "Did he also mention why I was in the church, or how I got these?" She pushed back her sleeve to reveal the now fading bruises on her wrist. The sheriff shifted uneasily. "Madam, whatever disagreements you had with your husband, they weren't disagreements," Nora interrupted, her voice hard. "They were beatings. For 2 years, Sheriff, and they would have continued if Quinn hadn't helped me escape." Henry's face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful whore," he spat. "After everything I gave you, careful," Quinn warned, his hand moving to his gun. "That's no way to speak to a lady." The third man, sensing the shifting dynamics, took a step back. "Sheriff, you didn't mention nothing about beating women. I ain't getting involved in no domestic dispute." The sheriff looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Henry, you said she'd been kidnapped, that Sutherland had taken advantage," he lied, Nora stated flatly. "As he's been lying to all of Sloane for years about what happens behind closed doors." She kept the shotgun steady, drawing strength from Quinn's presence beside her. "I'm not going back, Henry, not now, not ever." Henry's hand moved suddenly to his gun, but Quinn was faster, drawing and aiming in one fluid motion. "I wouldn't," he advised quietly. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the sheriff slowly raised his hands, stepping away from Henry. "I think we've misunderstood the situation," he said carefully. "Henry, you didn't tell me the whole story." "There's nothing to understand," Henry snarled. "She's my wife." The law also says assaulting women is a crime," the sheriff interrupted, his expression hardening as he looked more closely at Nora's still visible injuries. "One I don't condone, badge or no badge." The third man was already backing toward his horse. "I'm out," he announced. "Didn't sign up for this kind of trouble." Henry, suddenly finding himself without allies, looked desperately between the sheriff and Quinn. "You can't just let her go," he protested. "She belongs to me." "I belong to myself," Nora corrected, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands on the shotgun. "And I choose to be here with Quinn." The sheriff nodded slowly, seeming to reach a decision. "Mrs. Whitfield, or whatever name you prefer, now appears to be here of her own free will, making her own choices." He turned to Henry. "I suggest we respect those choices and leave these good people in peace." Henry's face contorted with rage. "You're taking their side." "After I paid you to," he stopped abruptly, realizing his error, but it was too late. The sheriff's expression hardened. "That's enough, Henry," he said firmly. "We're leaving now." For a moment, it seemed Henry might resist, might make the fatal mistake of drawing against Quinn's already aimed weapon. But self-preservation won out. With a last venomous glare at Nora, he turned and stalked toward his horse. "This isn't over," he called back as he mounted. "I'll find a judge who understands a husband's rights." "And I'll find one who understands a woman's," Nora replied, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. They watched as Henry, the sheriff, and the hired gun rode away, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Only when they had disappeared entirely did Quinn lower his gun, turning to Nora with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Nora nodded, though the shotgun trembled visibly in her hands now that the immediate danger had passed. Quinn gently took it from her, setting it aside before drawing her into his arms. "You were magnificent," he murmured against her hair. "Braver than anyone I've ever known." Nora buried her face against his chest, the enormity of what had just occurred washing over her. "Do you think it's really over?" she whispered. Quinn stroked her hair gently. "With Henry, maybe not entirely, not yet, but he knows now that you're not alone, that you have someone who stands with you." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "And you showed him something too, that you're not the frightened woman he could control anymore." Nora realized the truth of Quinn's words. Standing on that porch, facing Henry with the shotgun in her hands, she had felt a power she'd forgotten. She possessed the power to choose her own path, to defend her own freedom. "Come inside," Quinn said gently. "It's your home now too, home." The word filled Nora with warmth as Quinn led her into the cabin, their cabin now. It was modest but solid, with the comfortable lived-in feeling of a place that had been cared for. A large fireplace dominated one wall, bookshelves beside it filled with well-worn volumes. Simple furniture, a table, chairs. A sofa covered in a handmade quilt spoke of a life built with purpose rather than pretension. Quinn built a fire while Nora explored, discovering the small kitchen with its cast iron stove, the bedroom with its wide bed frame that Quinn had crafted himself from local pine. Everything about the place spoke of the man himself, straightforward, honest, built to last. They shared a simple meal, sitting close together at the table as night settled fully around the ranch. The confrontation had left them both drained but strangely exhilarated, as though a weight had been lifted. "What happens now?" Nora asked as they sat before the fire afterward, her head resting on Quinn's shoulder. "Whatever we decide," Quinn replied, his arm around her waist. The ranch needs work. I've been thinking of expanding the herd, maybe adding some horses. He glanced down at her. You said your father raised horses. You might have insights I lack. The casual way he included her in future plans, assuming her skills and opinions had value, warmed Nora more than the fire before them. With Henry, her past experience had been dismissed, her knowledge belittled. With Quinn, it was respected, even sought. I'd like that, she said softly, though I'll need to learn much more about cattle. Quinn smiled. We'll learn from each other then. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling before them. Finally, Nora voiced the concern that had lingered at the back of her mind. Legally, I'm still Henry's wife, she said quietly. He could make trouble for us. Quinn considered this. Nevada's divorce laws are more progressive than most states. Cruelty is grounds for dissolution. With your testimony and those visible injuries, you'd likely prevail. Nora looked up at him, surprised. You've thought about this? Quinn nodded. Wanted to be sure you had options, whatever you decided. He hesitated, then added more softly, and selfishly, I hoped you might choose to stay. Eventually, as more than just a woman, I helped escape. The implication was clear, and Nora's heart swelled with unexpected joy. Are you proposing, Quinn Sutherland? She asked, a smile playing at her lips. Not officially, Quinn replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. That would have to wait until you're legally free. But I am saying that I've fallen in love with you, Nora. These past days have shown me what was missing in my life, not just companionship, but you specifically, with your courage and kindness and determination. Tears filled Nora's eyes, but they were tears of happiness. I love you too, she whispered. I think I began to fall the moment you stood between me and Henry in the church, the first person who had seen my suffering and chose to act. Quinn's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb gently brushing away a tear that had escaped. We'll build something good here, he promised, something that belongs to both of us equally. That night in the bed that would now be theirs, they sealed their commitment to each other with tender touches and whispered promises. For Nora, the contrast between this loving union and what she had experienced with Henry was profound. Where Henry had demanded and taken, Quinn offered and shared. Where Henry had diminished her, Quinn elevated her. It was a revelation, a healing, and a beginning all at once. In the months that followed, they fell into a rhythm of shared work and companionship that strengthened their bond daily. Nora filed for divorce, supported by Quinn and, surprisingly, by the Carson City Sheriff, whose testimony regarding Henry's admission of payment for illegal services proved valuable. Henry fought the proceedings initially, his wounded pride demanding resistance. But faced with mounting evidence of his abusive behavior and the revelation of his attempt to bribe a law officer, he eventually relented, agreeing to the dissolution in exchange for a small settlement from the sale of Nora's father's land that, by rights, should have remained hers all along. News traveled slowly to Sloan, where opinions about the scandal were predictably divided. Some condemned Nora for abandoning her husband. Others, particularly women who had witnessed Henry's temper, privately applauded her escape. Through it all, Quinn remained her steadfast champion, never once questioning her decision to seek legal freedom. His ranch flourished under their combined efforts, Nora's knowledge of horses complementing Quinn's cattle expertise as they gradually expanded their operations. Illy, the young ranch hand, returned from Carson City to find his employer transformed not just by the presence of a woman in the previously bachelor household, but by the evident happiness that radiated from Quinn. After initial wariness, Illy became a loyal ally, his youth and enthusiasm bringing additional energy to the ranch. The divorce was finalized in the spring of 1880, 6 months after Nora's flight from the church in Sloan. True to his word, Quinn proposed officially the very day the papers were signed, offering Nora a simple silver ring that had belonged to his mother. Not fancy, he apologized as he slipped it onto her finger, but given with all my heart. It's perfect, Nora assured him, admiring how it caught the light. Like everything else about our life together. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Thompson Ranch with the neighbors and Illy as witnesses. Nora wore a new dress of deep blue that matched Quinn's eyes, her auburn hair flowing freely down her back in the spring sunshine. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, a gathering of the people who had supported their unconventional journey. As dusk fell and lanterns were lit around the Thompsons' barn, Quinn led Nora outside to watch the stars emerge. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. Nora leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "You gave me back myself, Quinn, then you gave me your heart. What more could I want?" Quinn's smile was visible in the gathering darkness. "Perhaps eventually a family to share this with," he suggested tentatively, "if that's something you'd want." Nora turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to frame his face. "I'd want that very much," she said softly. "Children who grow up knowing what love truly looks like: respectful, kind, equal." Quinn kissed her then, a promise sealed beneath the vast Nevada sky that had witnessed their journey from danger to sanctuary, from fear to love. That night, returning to their ranch, truly theirs now in name as well as spirit, they made plans and dreamed dreams that would have seemed impossible to Nora just months before when she had fled to the church in Sloan, desperate and bleeding. Life would still bring challenges, the harsh realities of ranching in Nevada territory, occasional rumors that Henry was making threats when drunk in Sloan, the ordinary difficulties that any marriage faces. But faced together, with mutual respect and growing love, these challenges only strengthened the bond between them. By the following spring, Nora was expecting their first child, her body rounding with new life as the ranch greened with the season's renewal. Quinn's pride and tenderness as he watched her grow was yet another healing balm to the wounds of her past. Their son, James, was born on a clear autumn day in 1881. With Quinn pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door while Mrs. Thompson assisted with the delivery. When he was finally allowed in to see his wife and newborn son, Quinn's face reflected a wonder that made Nora fall in love with him all over again. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with careful hands that usually guided cattle and built fences. "Like his mother." As James grew, so did the ranch, prospering under their combined care and vision. 2 years later, their family expanded again with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth, whose auburn hair matched her mother's and whose determined spirit reflected both her parents. By 1885, the Sutherland Ranch had become one of the most respected in the region, known for its quality cattle and increasingly for its fine horses, which Nora bred and trained with skill inherited from her father and refined through her own talent. Henry Whitfield's threats had eventually subsided as he faced his own troubles, the saloon in Sloan failing as his reputation soured, his drinking increasing until he was more pathetic than menacing. When news came that he had died in a fire of his own drunken causing, Nora felt not joy but a quiet relief that the last shadow over their happiness had finally lifted. On the 10th anniversary of the night Quinn had found Nora in the church in Sloan, they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set beyond the western mountains. The ranch around them hummed with healthy activity, cattle grazing in distant pastures, horses in the corral, ranch hands preparing for evening in the bunkhouse that Quinn had built to accommodate their growing operation. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked, her hand finding Quinn's as it had countless times over the years. "That night in the church, when you found me," Quinn shook his head, his thumb tracing familiar patterns across her knuckles. "Couldn't have dreamed it," he admitted, "was just trying to do what was right in the moment." Nora smiled, watching as James, now 7, showed his 5-year-old sister how to twirl a small lariat he had made. "One right choice led to another, and here we are." "No regrets?" Quinn asked, though he knew the answer. "Not one," Nora replied firmly. "Every step, even the painful ones, brought me here to you, to our children, to this life we've built together." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his steady presence as she had that first night on the trail. "This is what freedom truly means, not just escape from what harms us, but the chance to create something beautiful in its place." Quinn's arm tightened around her shoulders as they watched the Nevada sunset paint the sky in colors no artist could capture. The church in Sloan where their journey had begun seemed a lifetime ago, though in truth it had been just a decade. The desperate woman hiding from her abusive husband and the solitary cowboy who had helped her disappear had transformed together, building a life neither could have imagined on that fateful night. As darkness fell and Quinn called the children in for supper, Nora remained on the porch a moment longer, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the courage she had found that night and for the man who had helped her discover it within herself. The stars emerged above, the same stars that had witnessed their flight across the Nevada landscape, and now blessed the home and family they had created together. Inside, laughter and warmth awaited the sounds of the life they had built, the love they had found, the freedom they had claimed together.